Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I'm Robbie with Agence France Presse. As you know, more than 9,000 people were taken into custody in the aftermath of Mr. Hachalu's assassination. How many of those people are still in custody? And what is your response to allegations from Human Rights Watch and other organizations that the investigation process was marred by serious due process violations, people being rearrested, violation of bail orders, that sort of thing? And related to that, Mr. Jawar Mohammed was in court today saying that the case against him is politicized and this is an attempt by the government to put him behind bars so that he cannot run in elections. What is your response to that? My second question is for Bekele. You mentioned the violence in Bekele zone. What has the government been able to confirm about the nature of the violence, the nature of those attacks, who was involved and why, and what sort of details can you provide on how people were affected, deaths, displacement, injuries? And that's it.
Excellency Attorney General, election is coming up. Within this year should be held. As my friend tried to mention it, some of the opposition leaders, perhaps arguably the strong ones, are said to be in prison or are facing trial. What do you think is going to be the shadow effect of such an act while the Prime Minister is promising a free, fair, and peaceful, credible elections coming up? Thank you so much.
Are we working? Yeah, we're working. Simon Marks with Bloomberg. Without repeating some of the questions, I'll try and differentiate. But first one, for Bekele, simply, do you think that the upcoming elections can be considered fair and credible if some of the Prime Minister's sort of greatest opponents and critics are in fact in a pre-trial phase or in detention of some sort? And obviously we're talking about people like Jawar Mohammed here. And my second question to His Excellency the Attorney General, could you perhaps go into a bit more detail on some of the evidence that's been brought forward to charge both Bekele, Gerba and Jawar Mohammed? Because some of the sort of analysis and critique we hear is that the law, the anti-terror law, for example, that's been used has been often politicized in the past. But perhaps you can just maybe spell out some of the evidence to maybe back up those charges. I'd be interested in knowing. Thank you.
You've given us some figures here concerning the destruction and loss of lives. 160 have died and 360 injured. And what are these a result of? I mean, have there been independent investigation done and everybody across the board agreed on these figures? Or?
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm not really good with names, and I might not have caught your name, so I'll just simply address the questions and the issues. As far as the first question is concerned, the investigations in Oromia have already been completed, and as I've already said, charges are being pressed throughout the week. We expect some charges to be pressed tomorrow, and some maybe early next week. So until that process is completed, it will be difficult to give exact figures as to how many people are being processed through the judicial system. The current figure we have is above 2,000 suspects are being charged for their participation in the violence that has taken place in the Oromia regional state. And we hope that will give you a more reliable and a more exact figure sometime next week once all the charges have been filed at the courts. With regard to the complaints in relation to the handling of the suspects and the human rights situation, as I have already indicated, due to the large size of the number of the suspects, the number of the suspects is high because the nature of the crimes was such that these were riots, these were mob attacks that involved thousands. So given the number of people who have participated in the commission of the crime, the number of people that will be arrested would also naturally be high. So some might characterize it as mass arrest, but it's because there was a mass that participated in the crime, in the commission of the crimes. Yes, there have been shortcomings and some challenges throughout the process from the human rights perspective, but I would say that in relative terms they're not major, and to the extent that these kind of issues and challenges cropped up, they were pointed out by various entities, particularly by our own Human Rights Commission, and remedial measures were taken to rectify this situation. Now, as far as the nature of the charge is concerned, yes, some of the suspects, some of the accused complain that they are being charged for their political activity because they criticize the government, or because because of this or that. But I would reiterate the fact that, one, there were hundreds of people who have been directly affected by the violence these individuals have instigated and incited. Right? So we have to distinguish between peaceful, lawful political mobilization and the kind of rhetoric, the kind of ultra-nationalist, militant, violent political activism that results in deaths and injury of citizens. There might be a correlation between their political activity and the crimes they have committed, but we have to distinguish between correlation and causation. Some of the suspects, some of the accused are politicians, but they are not being charged for their political activity. They are being charged for their acts, their conduct that has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of citizens. And that's not something we could ignore. That's not something we could put under the rug. This is something that has to be investigated, and people have to be held accountable to the extent of their participation. The people who directly participated in the mob attacks, the individuals, the youngsters, they have to be held accountable. That's true. But those who have organized them, those who have instigated them, those who have incited them also have to be accountable. Whether they are journalists, politicians, it shouldn't matter. As far as coming to the third question, I think it was an update or the status of the trials relating to the assassination of the Chief of Staff and the officials of the Amara Regional State. As far as those, as far as the suspect and the perpetrator of the assassination of the Chief of Staff is concerned, the court has already pronounced it, gave its ruling on the guilt of the accused, so we could say that he's a convict. Now, what remains is sentencing, and the case has been adjourned for sentencing, so it's in its final stages. The other case as well it has progressed, and it's in a rather final stages, but not as advanced as the first case I mentioned. We hope and expect that now that new judges have been appointed both at the federal first instance level and at the federal high court, the burden on the judiciary would be in a better position to speed up these cases and sentence them and conclude the proceedings. So that's the update that we could give. But I would also like to reiterate that since these trials are held in public, the media could also see the proceedings, observe the proceedings, and report on the proceedings. As far as the protection of citizens is concerned, in addition to what my colleague Bekele has said, in addition to the thwarted traits, we have also to take into account that the law enforcement efforts we are undertaking are meant to ensure that there will not be impunity, and by bringing an end to a sense of impunity, we are of the opinion that the likelihood of similar attacks being perpetrated in the future would decline. So bringing suspects, bringing those responsible for these crimes to justice is another mechanism for ensuring that this kind of things will not keep occurring again and again. The other question that has been raised was in relation to the use of the anti-terror proclamation and the evidences that the government has. Now, as far as the counterterrorism proclamation is concerned, what I would like to clarify is, first and foremost, in most of the cases that you have in mind, the most serious charge that has been brought against the accused is not even on the basis of the counterterrorism proclamation. It's on the basis of the ordinary criminal code. So many of the high-profile suspects have been accused of violating Article 240 of the Criminal Code, which entails a more serious penalty, which is clearly the more serious offense. As far as the counterterrorism proclamation is concerned, most of the accused are accused for the lesser crime of preparation for terrorist acts. So compared with the charge under Article 240 of the Criminal Code, which relates to inciting and instigating attacks, riots, both against citizens and the government, this is relatively even a less serious offense. So I am, to some extent, I'm a bit perplexed because these are individuals who have been charged for crimes that are far more serious, but the charge that is getting all the attention is the less serious offense. So a closer look at the charge could clarify the situation. Furthermore, due to the legislative reforms that have taken place over the last 2 years, the counterterrorism proclamation we have now offers no tactical or procedural or evidentiary advantage for the prosecution. Previously, the complaints about abuse of the anti-terror proclamation could have been rather justified because compared with the ordinary criminal code, the anti-terror proclamation offered enormous, huge procedural and tactical advantage in terms of how the evidence is weighted, assessed, in terms of pre-trial detention, so forth and so on. But the counterterrorism proclamation that is currently in place offers no such advantage for the prosecution, and it doesn't put the suspects at any undue disadvantage. So if you ask me, it's not the prosecution that is trying to politicize the proceedings, it's the other way around. Finally, as far as the number of victims and the damage that has been assessed is concerned, these are the numbers that we have arrived at through our investigation process. So far, we have not seen any credible data that challenge these figures. So, in our view, these are as credible as the figures of victims, fatalities that one could get at this point in time. Thank you.